Our next guest, Brittany, has had one of the most interesting career trajectories of anyone I've ever known. You probably know her as one of the original whistleblowers of Cambridge Analytica, who came forward earlier this year to alert authorities and alert the public, really, to what their employer, Cambridge Analytica, had been up to. And what that was, as we now all know, was misusing Facebook data, or using Facebook data without the user's explicit permission, certainly, to build psychological profiles, in these cases, for the use of pinprick accuracy of political advertising aimed at potential voters to help sway what their vote might be. But before Brittany was the business development director of Cambridge Analytica, before she shared a key to the Breitbart Embassy, which is Steve Bannon's alt-right headquarters in Washington, D.C., before she was meeting with Donald Trump's campaign manager to pitch the services of Cambridge Analytica, she was a Bernie Sanders supporter. She had worked for Barack Obama's 2008 campaign, managing his Facebook profile of all things. So as I was thinking about this session, my thinking began first with how does this self-described progressive end up working for this shadowy political agency, consultancy, that's involved in one of the most shocking data breaches that we've ever seen. And then what's her prescription for how we move forward in this area of digital privacy? So I'd like to start. Brittany, welcome to Sooner Than You Think.
Thank you so much, Mark.
I'd like to start with how do you end up going from Bernie Sanders to working with a group that's funded by the billionaire right-wing family of Robert and Rebecca Mercer and Steve Bannon?
First of all, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. This year, 2018, has been such a huge opportunity for the first time for the public to start thinking about our digital assets, the data that we produce every day. And I couldn't be more excited to tell you about my journey on how I really started thinking about how important this issue is to our everyday lives. So I have been a campaigner for my entire career, and I would say even before I had a career, I started working in political campaigning and human rights advocacy when I was 14 years old, still at boarding school. The first political campaign that I ever worked on was Howard Dean's presidential, which then ended up as John Kerry's presidential campaign and Barack Obama's senatorial. Now, the first time I really started thinking about how you could use data for political means was in 2007 when I quit university to move home to Chicago to work at Barack Obama's campaign headquarters. My first assignment was to create Barack Obama's Facebook page and begin to manage that. Now, over the months that I was at headquarters, I started to learn how you could use, obviously in a much more simple version than we were later using in campaigns today, but how you could start to spot trends in data in order to really understand what people care about. It was so inspiring to realize that by interacting with social media and with more basic data platforms, texting platforms, and analyzing emails that were coming into campaign headquarters, you could really get to grips with what issues were so important to people. What did the campaign and Barack Obama himself need to start addressing in order to make sure that the issues that were important to his constituency and to the country were really addressed in his policies? Now, I spent the next many years after winning that campaign not working in just politics, but in human rights advocacy. I studied as a human rights lawyer and worked for various human rights NGOs, such as Amnesty International and special consults to the United Nations Human Rights Council. And it was through those organizations that I started to realize how important data was for something called measurements of effectiveness. Now, anybody that's ever worked in campaigning will know MOE, or measurements of effectiveness, are the most important part of being able to show your impact. And traditionally, that's a very difficult thing to do. There are sometimes human rights campaigns where you're trying to get an innocent person out of jail, and once they're released, you know that you've succeeded. But there are much more complex campaigns, such as working on environmental impact and policies, or changing incremental laws to make sure that more individuals might have access to healthcare, for instance. And it's very hard to find out how many people you've reached, how many people are listening, how many people really care and are engaging with your message. So when you spend 24/7 working on issues that you're so passionate about, being able to use data to show the impact that you're having is probably the most important part of everything that you're doing. After my third law degree, I started working on my PhD in war crimes prevention in something called preventive diplomacy. How you can use soft power tactics, so nonviolent tactics, in order to prevent war, genocide, crimes against humanity. That's my academic specialty. And my entire PhD ended up being about where are all of the data sets that exist around the world? How are they collected on a national and global level, both offline and online? How can we start to spot patterns and build models and algorithms that will help us detect famine, inflation, riots, violence before it becomes too difficult to stop? Now, while writing this third chapter of my PhD on data, I was introduced to Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, but at that time I knew him as the CEO of the SCL Group, Strategic Communication Laboratories, a company which was known to be one of the top organizations in the world working on PSYOPs. So psychological operations might sound like a scary defense word, but it's actually just another term for soft power. How can you use communications in order to prevent violent conflict? Now, when I was first introduced to him, the first project that I heard about that he was working on was training all NATO militaries on how to spot individuals online through data and searches and communications that were vulnerable to being recruited into ISIS, and be able to run counter-propaganda communications to those individuals to keep them at home, safe with their families, and not sneaking themselves into Syria. I was so incredibly inspired by that, and I thought it would be perfect for my PhD research to get some hands-on experience, and that's how I joined.
And that was what year?
That was in 2014.
Right. Okay, so let's skip forward to March 2018. You're testifying before Parliament, which is looking at fake news and how it was used in Brexit, for example. And that's when you begin to, on the heels of Christopher Wiley, who was the first whistleblower, to begin to explain what Cambridge Analytica had become. And that was an organization that saw an opening in conservative politics, particularly in the United States, right? And saw a way of bringing data use to those campaigns, which desperately needed to catch up in the U.S., for example, to what Barack Obama had been doing. And so what made you come out as a whistleblower and challenge the statements that Alexander Nix had been making?
Well, firstly, to address the fake news issue, as soon as I saw a story that was so close to me, that I was intimately involved with, being spread all over the press around the world and spread incorrectly with people who were either not telling the truth about the situation or did not fully comprehend what they were talking about, I thought, now is the time to get up and tell people exactly what has been going on, what the company's been doing, and how this whole system actually works. There's a very low data literacy around the world because you can't see digital assets, you can't see data sets. A lot of people have trouble comprehending the amount of data that they produce every day, how that's collected, how that's held, how that's modeled, and what risks and rewards there are from that. So once I saw another whistleblower come out about the Facebook data sets, I thought, well, most people don't even understand what this means. And it's not up to me, it's up to the authorities to decide if data was used properly or improperly. But if a company like Cambridge Analytica that was under the microscope and constantly being audited and reviewed by governments and federal election commissions all over the world was possibly able to get away with using data sets they were not legally allowed to have, how many other tens of thousands of companies around the world were getting away with the same thing or worse? That was what really actually disturbed me, that there were so many people that didn't understand how big and systemic this problem was. Now, I have cared about fake news and people really understanding the truth of the matter for a very long time. I actually helped create a platform called Tagly in 2012, 2013, which was an anti-fake news platform. It was created specifically so that citizen journalists who were working in the field or individuals who were in conflict zones that were taking photos and posting them on social media did not have their digital assets, their content repurposed. At the time in 2012, 2013 was the first time that the term fake news started being used. On social media, you would see somebody taking a photo from Tahrir Square and saying that something like that had just happened in a certain part of Iraq that day, and that was a complete falsification and misuse of data. So this app, before blockchain technology or more advanced tracking and tracing technology existed, would encrypt in the metadata of your photos and your digital assets the time, place, and author of that content, so that no matter how many times that was shared or retweeted or repurposed, you knew the original time, place, and intent of that content. So trying to address a huge systemic fake news problem this past March, I thought it's time to come out and give everybody as much information as humanly possible about how the data industry works, about how data modeling works, and about how this is used by governments, militaries, commercial companies, and especially political parties.
So in 2015, I believe September, you are called to Trump Tower to pitch the services of Cambridge Analytica to the then nascent Trump campaign. How did that happen, and what was the pitch? What did you say Cambridge Analytica would do?
So we started speaking with the Trump campaign before Donald Trump even announced that he was running for president. I believe our first meeting with Corey Lewandowski was meant to be the week before the announcement with the whole escalator situation. And we ended up having conversations throughout the summer of how can a national database begin to be built to see which individuals were engaging with Donald Trump as an individual and his issues and his messages. Now, there was a plan A and a plan B. One of those plans was Donald Trump was running for president and we were going to run a political campaign. Plan B was if Donald Trump is not to become president, that the newest, most exciting TV network on television would be Trump TV. Either way, we were going to be running a national campaign to find out who in America was interested in watching Donald Trump speak, in his messages, in his colleagues, in everybody that he surrounded himself with, so that we could build either a political empire or a commercial empire. Now, I didn't go see Corey Lewandowski until September 2015. I was in D.C. at the Breitbart Embassy with Steve Bannon and my CEO, Alexander Nix, having a meeting, and Steve receives a call on his phone from Donald Trump, and he puts it on loudspeaker. The next day, Donald Trump and Senator Ted Cruz were holding an anti-dropping sanctions on Iran rally on the Hill, and Steve and some of our colleagues had been involved in setting up this event. Now, they started talking about this, and then Mr. Trump says, "Hey, Steve, when are you going to send me your English guys?" I thought you were going to send me your English guys over here for the campaign. And Steve said, well, Brittany and Alexander are right here. They can come see you straight away. We're just in D.C. And he said, send them tomorrow morning early before we take the jet to D.C. So Alexander and I left the Breitbart embassy, took the train up to New York, and the next morning at 8 a.m., we're in the elevator in Trump Tower going up to campaign HQ. Now, this was actually very funny. I had never seen before, when the elevator doors opened, an empty campaign HQ. I walked out, and this was a pretty much bare bones set that just had a couple Make America Great Again posters on the wall. And I said, Corey, I've never been to Trump Tower before. Why does this look so familiar? He goes, oh, of course you've seen this before. You've seen The Apprentice, haven't you? Corey, are you telling me that this campaign HQ is a reality TV set? And it was. Corey, a political advisor, and his assistant, who looked about half my age, and I was 26 at the time, were the only people that were working there. We proceeded to talk about how we could start to build up a database, because it didn't seem that there was anyone else there doing that, and how we could put together an advanced data analytics program that would be able to rival the probably already 10,000 people that were working for Secretary Clinton. Now, that was a long negotiation. At the time, Cambridge Analytica was running Senator Cruz's campaign, and he was pretty competitive with Mr. Trump at the time, so we didn't end up actually working for Mr. Trump until he became the nominee, which was, 8 months later, I think.
Right. So, as we all know, there are multiple investigations underway in the United States, in the UK, looking at what happened in terms of fake news, what happened in terms of potential Russian involvement in both Brexit and the 2016 U.S. election. I want to ask you, based on what you know, did Cambridge Analytica's misuse of the personal data of millions and millions of people, both in the U.S. and the U.K. for that matter, in the case of the UK, did it help the Brexit, pro-Brexit forces? Did that misuse of data help lead to the decision to exit the EU?
Now, again, it's not up to me, it's up to the authorities whether data was used properly or improperly. But the fact is that Cambridge Analytica, along with tens of thousands of other companies, had access to the Facebook Friends Data API before April 2015. Now, I'm sorry to break it to everybody, but if you were on Facebook before April 2015, you're never getting your privacy back. That data has been copied and proliferated around the world so many times without any due diligence, without any tracking or traceability on a technology level, that there's no way that you are ever going to be able to erase all of that data. You're not going to get it back. Now, I'm sorry if you are really into your privacy. I'm not a privacy campaigner. I've got to put that out there. I believe that, one, privacy doesn't exist in kind of a post-Facebook data crisis era. It's possible for all the future data we produce and for our children and grandchildren, which is why I have gotten on my high horse and care so much about these types of campaigns. But if we are really going to believe, and I think most people in this room do, in the future of AI and data science, then we have to get away from this fear-mongering idea of privacy. We need to think about how we, as a global community of technologists, how we are going to solve the problems for individuals to feel comfortable sharing as much data as possible. imagine if everybody around the world shared their medical data instead of only 20-something-year-old young white men, which is what most medicines are based off of, because those are the people that go to medical trials, how fast we could solve cancers and diabetes, et cetera, and so forth. So I'm really talking about how we can start to solve these problems so that we can share more data, not keep more data private, so just so we're all on the same page. Now, obviously, the more data that you have, the more accurate your models are going to be. So if there were data sets that were used in the Brexit campaign and the Trump campaign that did not have explicit opt-in by individuals, that's very possible. And no, that wouldn't be in accordance with laws and regulations, but of course that would make models more accurate and would have made much more successful campaigns.
Do you think that's also true in the 2016 election? Do you think that the data that Cambridge Analytica had from the tens of millions of Facebook users and other social media platforms, do you think that helped sway the election for Donald Trump?
Well, it's very possible. And it wouldn't only be Cambridge Analytica. That would be all of that data that was used by any other company.
Or country.
Or country, exactly. So I think what it comes down to is the fact that there was what my former CEO, Alexander Nix, used to call it a situation which was like the Wild West. In the United States and in many other countries, the laws and regulations have not yet caught up with the technology that we're using. So it's very easy for anybody to obtain data sets, for instance, on individuals in the United States, purchase it and license it, and use it to target you with any kind of messaging. Facebook made it quite easy for even people from Russia to log in and purchase political advertising and false news advertising that was targeted at over 126 million Americans, which is our voting population. Now, luckily, leading up to November, I'm very excited to say that they've been making a lot of new strides in transparency, in opt-in infrastructure, but that's really only the beginning. We have a very long uphill battle, and we've only started to begin with addressing some of these issues, which, if you're not fully briefed into what some of these issues are, I would say number one is transparency. What data is being collected from you? Is it being collected from different apps in your phone? Is it being collected from your microphone, from your camera, from the websites you visit? Where is it being stored? And what is it going to be used for? Now, in the United States, you are pre-opted in just because you are in America for your data to be collected and sold and licensed and held and modeled for whatever purpose. It's not the same in most other countries around the world. Most other countries, specifically European countries, you need to give an explicit opt-in in order for that to happen. A campaign just can't send you communications based off of your data, and organizations can't just purchase and license and hold your data to do with it as they will. So the next step is opt-in. How can we have explicit opt-in infrastructure that makes sure that everybody around the world, if their data is being held and used, you have agreed to it? Now, GDPR is starting to get us closer to that, and luckily Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts has just introduced the consent bill to the US Congress so we can have an opt-in infrastructure in the United States. But right now, most of the things that are done with data manipulation in the US are 100% legal. And that's what is most shocking and what most people don't understand.
We're running out of time, but I did want to ask also whether you thought that Cambridge Analytica had worked with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks to help disseminate some of the purloined Hillary Clinton-related data that the Russians obtained, according to U.S. intelligence.
As far as I know, no. Right. But apparently there were quite a few things going on that I wasn't fully briefed into, so I guess we're going to find out about that.
I should point out, you did meet with Julian Assange in February in London, February 2017.
I did.
Right. What was that meeting about?
Well, I first started using WikiLeaks when I was in high school when they dropped the Iraq war files. As I said, my academic expertise is in war crimes, and it's very difficult to get access to primary source material about crimes that governments have committed during war. I think you can imagine why. So even in my college entrance essays, I used WikiLeaks as a primary source and in my bibliography and for my first few legal theses. So when I was offered through friends to go and visit him, I thought, this is a great opportunity. I would love to meet him and see what he thinks about the world.
And what does he think about the world?
Well, he sees this year or last year, I guess, when I saw him, as a huge linchpin in kind of the changing of where a lot of different cultures are going, and I really couldn't agree more. In the past year and a half since I last saw him, the amount of changes that have been made in politics, in technology, in political ideology especially, are huge and really important. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I decided to be so vocal in this situation, because the more that people are educated about these issues, the better. I recently met with Megan Smith, the CTO of the White House under Obama, and she started talking about something called DQ instead of IQ or EQ, a digital intelligence. She's working on programs to integrate that into the public education system, so when our children grow up, they're going to learn about how you protect yourself online, the data that you produce, how you can own your own digital assets. The campaign that I was discussing with her, which is something that I started after I decided to become a whistleblower, is own your data. What does that mean? It means that the digital assets that you produce every day are your own human value. You should be able to own them, and you should be able to share in the monetization of that, just like with Airbnb. If somebody is going to come and use your physical assets, you would expect to agree a price and what they're going to do with it before you hand over the keys to your house. Why isn't that the same with your data? I really think that that's probably the biggest opportunity that we have right now. Facebook alone could provide 2.2 billion people with a universal basic income by giving them Facebook tokens on the blockchain for the data that they use and sell to their advertisers every day. If we're talking about sooner than you think, I know that Facebook already has a blockchain team, so I really hope that that will be one of the exciting surprises that we hear about over the next couple months.